Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to do some practice related to prompts that affect consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. We're going to see, does aggregate demand go up, down, or not change? So let's get started. Okay, so the first part of this one says significant boom in the stock market. That's our prompt. CIGXN or no change. Well, that's going to affect consumer confidence. So I'm going to put C. And if it's a boom, that means aggregate demand is going up. If we increase Social Security payments, that's also going to increase our disposable income. So that's going to change C and again cause aggregate demand to go up. This is not going to change G. And that's because it's going to be, this is not actually included, right? These are transfers. And so transfers don't directly affect GDP, but they do affect consumer spending. And so this can kind of indirectly affect it. Consumers fear a recession is coming. That's kind of the opposite of the first one. We'd say C again, but this one, aggregate demand is going to fall because consumers are going to pull back on what they spend. Let me zoom out just a shade here so we can actually see the whole statement. Oh, it doesn't look like I can. That's too much. All right. The actual old school way. Let me pull that bad boy up. There we go. All right. Increased income of a global trade partner. That means that they're going to buy our stuff. They'll buy our stuff, which means our XN will increase, and so our aggregate demand would rise. If Congress cut our personal income taxes, that's really the same as number two. That's going to increase consumption spending, and it's therefore going to increase aggregate demand. Investment spending goes down. Well, that's just one of our categories, I, and so aggregate demand would fall. Consumers expect a job market being strong really soon. Strong meaning good. And so that's really the same as number one. And that's going to affect consumption spending. Again, thinking about all the different ways that we could affect consumer confidence. If Congress cuts defense spending, that one is changing government spending, and that's a decrease. Government decreases pensions. That's the opposite of what do we got here, number two. And that's really just saying a cut in this amount, right? And so that's going to be consumption spending, but now it's going to fall because our consumers won't have as much, right? So there's discussions about maybe reducing Social Security benefits or something like that. That's going to reduce consumption spending and reduce aggregate demand. Lower inflation leads to more savings and more borrowing, so more quantity of spending. But here, the first initial event is lower inflation. And remember, price levels don't shift the curve. And that's why this is in bold and underlined, is to kind of remind you that PLs don't shift the curve, right? Price levels don't shift the curve. So we would say no change, and the quantity of aggregate demand in this case is going to be increased. And the real reason here is just because the aggregate demand curve actually builds in those inflation levels. So it's really just kind of saying, if we were to draw a graph off to the side, aggregate demand comes down. It's really just saying our price levels went down. And that's our quantity of output over here, right? Our real GDP. And it's just saying we went from 0.1 to 0.2. That's what that one looks like. So we had more quantity of spending, but we didn't actually change aggregate demand. Number 11, the central bank cuts real interest rates, so more borrowing and spending regardless of price levels. This is kind of the opposite of that, right? It's saying that sometimes interest rates will change, and it's going to be separated from the inflation rates. And in this case, there are two types of interest-sensitive spending, and they both work the same way, consumption and investment. And if there's more borrowing, then there's going to be more consumption and investment, and so aggregate demand would rise. U.S. dollar goes down in value relative to the euro, making U.S. goods cheaper and increasing foreign purchases regardless of prices. So this is kind of guiding us towards net exports, and it's telling us U.S. goods are cheaper, we're going to sell more, so aggregate demand will rise. Number 13, businesses reduce their purchases of new manufacturing equipment. That's a component of investment spending, and if they're not buying as much, that's going to be a decrease. Higher inflation, again, this is another one here, makes U.S. goods more expensive for foreigners, so less quantity of their spending. So it's really, again, telling you that in this one, you have just higher price levels. So it's like you're going from 0.1 to 0.2. And again, aggregate demand isn't changing here. It's just decreasing the quantity of output that people are actually buying. So no change. And we'd say quantity of aggregate demand decreases in that one. Number 15, businesses report larger inventories. That's an investment spending category. Changes in inventories, right? Changes in inventories. And if there's more of it, then there's going to be more aggregate demand. We know from last unit that sometimes is considered a warning indicator of the economy's health, that you might be seeing more aggregate demand here just through more investment spending, but it actually is a sign that maybe consumer confidence is slowing down. Rising inflation, this last one, lowers consumers' wealth and purchasing power, so less quantity of spending. Again, going from 1 to 2. Really, all three of these are just examples of the different reasons why price levels change the quantity of aggregate demand, but not actually the aggregate demand function itself. We said there was the wealth effect, there's the foreign exchange effect, and then there's the kind of interest rate effect, which is what number 10 is describing. So again, no change. And in this one, if it's higher inflation, then the quantity of aggregate demand is going to fall. Number 17, government provides a tax credit for new home construction. So you might initially think, oh, it's going to be government spending, but it's not. It's a tax change, and it's on new homes, which is an investment spending category, right? This is the key here, construction. That's going to make aggregate demand increase, right? This one, that's the biggie, new home construction. Any new construction is always investment spending. When there's more of it, because we're giving a tax credit, this is kind of a tax cut is a way to say that, right? So that's another way, right? Tax cut equals tax credit. So I'm going to put that here. You might also see a tax deduction is another word for that. So these are all just kind of words that mean similar things. Credits and deductions aren't quite the same, but they're similar enough to being tax cuts. And again, that's going to encourage something. Number 18, Americans express preference for new international cars, XN, and that means those cars are made somewhere else, which is actually going to cause aggregate demand to decrease. This is more imports, is what we would kind of categorize that as. So hopefully this helped you take a look at different prompts that might affect aggregate demand. I'll see you next time.